Hey.
Hi.
Okay, first question, how do you take your tea?
I like my tea really, really strong with just a splash of milk. I think they call it builder's tea.
Like a builder.
Black, no milk.
I would say a builder's tea.
Builder's brew.
I quite like a green tea, actually.
Can you tell me any unique names for a tea?
Yes. Cha. And of course the universal, like, I don't know, brew.
Cuppa. Tea.
Brew, cuppa, cup of cha.
Oh, I love a little tipple.
Bevy. Thirst quencher.
A steamer.
The military, they call it a wet.
A wet.
Why do you think tea is so important to the British people?
I think it's very much part of the British culture.
Everyone loves a pot of tea as a family or friends.
It's just a lovely, refreshing drink.
It's a ritual. Just even standing while the kettle's boiling gives you a few minutes thinking time and a little pause.
Backbone of Britain sort of thing, isn't it?
And how many cups would you say you have a day?
I lose count around about sort of 3, 4, 5.
30, maybe.
Try and say about 3, but if it's a bad day, it might be more.
Probably 2, 1 in the morning, 1 in the afternoon.
What do you like about a cup of tea?
It doesn't taste like coffee.
It's refreshing, even on a hot day. Or on a cold day, warms you up.
A lot of my ideas actually come from when I'm drinking tea.
It warms your soul.
What do you think a cup of tea can fix?
Everything. Tell me something a cup of tea can't fix.
If anything ever went wrong, it was like, we'll have a cup of tea.
The whole making a cup of tea just changes your whole headspace.
You can build an empire on a cup of tea.
What type of tea do you drink?
I drink Yorkshire tea.
Yorkshire.
Yorkshire tea.
A Yorkshire tea.
Yorkshire tea.
I'm obsessed with Lincolnshire tea. Can't go wrong with it.
Could you tell us about your mug?
It's the Beatles. There's nothing more British than the Beatles and a cup of tea.
I am a huge fan of the history of the Titanic, and this is a replica of what was on board the ship.
I always like to bring a bit of positivity in people's lives.
I love this mug. It's my favourite.
I'd like to be a rainbow unicorn most of the time.
Where does tea originate from?
I have absolutely no ideas.
Somewhere in the east.
Out the cupboard.
Good question. The story of tea is one steeped in history and legend. Since before the Egyptians built the Great Pyramids and Europe left the Dark Ages, it's been a staple of Chinese culture. It's travelled to every corner of the globe, had wars fought over it, and even sparked the American Revolution. But what are the true origins of tea, and how has it developed to become the world's most consumed beverage and the bloodstream of Britain? I'm Sophie, and today I'm taking a dive into the history of tea with some fascinating experts and unique stories. I'd love for you to join me. Firstly, shall we put the kettle on? I'm in the beautiful city of Lincoln, known for its historic architecture, bustling high street and Roman heritage. It's right in the heart of the UK, making it the perfect place to discover what makes tea so popular with the people of Britain. With dozens of tea rooms, cafes and vendors, it's not hard to find a decent cuppa. But I'm here to find out what impact it's had on society and whether there are any traditional origins left. So I've come to Imperial Teas of Lincoln, a local business of over 30 years, which specialises in hundreds of tea varieties from well-known classics right up to some of the rarest in the world. This is Ben. He used to be in a band, but swapped his guitar for a teapot and opened up Imperial Teas in 1991. He's an expert on all things dried and leafy, so I'm speaking to him about how tea found its way to us and the way it's developed to be such a huge part of our lives, whilst having a cup ourselves. Hello, Ben.
Hi.
Thank you so much for having me here today.
It's a pleasure.
So, where does tea originate from?
So tea is thought to originate in China. It's first recorded in archaeological documents around about 5,000 years BC.
So what are some of the myths or legends that we've heard about the origins of tea?
So there are a lot of those around. I'm not sure whether any of them bear any truth, but probably the most famous one is about a farmer called Shenong. Thought he poisoned himself, and then a leaf of tea blew off a tree he was resting underneath into his mouth. He chewed on it and consequently was cured of the poisoning. Tea, I don't think, can cure poisoning, by the way.
So how did tea come to our shores then?
It eventually arrived here via the Netherlands. One of the Portuguese royal family married our king at that time, and she was a big fan of tea, so it kind of became a little bit more fashionable, say around about 1650.
Would you say there's any Chinese roots in the tea that we have today, or any examples of this?
Yeah, I mean, Chinese tea still remains popular, and green tea's come back into the UK market in quite a strong way. Some of the original old sort of rare tea bushes and varieties are now making themselves known here in the UK.
Amazing. So obviously this is a beautiful, delicious cup of tea that you've made me. Have you got any stories of any trouble that tea has caused?
Well, tea has a long and quite dark history when we think about it. Many people believe that tea led to the creation of the independence of the United States as we know it now. A famous event called the Boston Tea Party. That was more of a protest at taxation that the British government put on American imports, and they took it off most things, but they would not take it off tea. For all the delight it can bring, it's got a tricky history, but mostly tied with the selling of it rather than tea in itself.
But why do you think it's so prominent in our society today? Why have we got such a connection with it?
Tea is a great comfort to people, and through the Industrial Revolution, it kind of replaced beer drinking. We have a saying in our family, which is, let's have a cup of tea and pretend everything is all right. And there's some science behind that, the idea that tea and sugar together can calm you down, physiologically calm you down. So maybe some things really wound up in our psyche, you know, it's handed down through generations.
So obviously you've got a massive variety of tea here. Is any tea actually grown here?
It's interesting actually, because there are a couple of plantations have recently started in the UK, one in Cornwall and one in Scotland. It produces a very small amount of tea. So though we say, you know, English tea, there isn't such a thing, but what I guess we mean by that is a particular type of tea.
So you mentioned this tea, can we have a little bit? Can we try a little bit?
Yes, absolutely, yeah. This is a tea called Gabalong, and it's a type of oolong, and this particular tea called Gabalong contains many healthy compounds, and one of them is called gamma-aminobutyric acid, part of the human growth hormone. But people are finding other novel ways of doing it. Iced teas becoming more popular, bubble tea, that's become much a craze here. We sell tea to a famous gin distiller, and again I think people are finding that, you know, that both the flavour of tea, but also the fact that maybe when you're drinking a lot of alcohol, a little part of that is also something that's healthy for you.
So now we know a bit more about where our cup has come from. But how does the tea we drink now compare to the delicate flavours of old? I'm at the Lawn Cafe, where the company roasts and blends their own teas and coffees, as well as serving some delicious food. I'm meeting Mike, who runs the roastery and training school. Hello, Mike.
Hello.
Thank you for having me. How are you?
Very good, thank you very much. Yeah, very excited about this.
First of all, what are the tea traditions you're demonstrating for us here today?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've got set up two different methods really for tasting tea. On the left here we've got a more sort of Chinese Eastern method to taste teas using a gaiwan. And on the right here we have a much more Western style how we're going to taste teas with the little teapots.
Though many people think there are hundreds of different teas, in actual fact there are only 6. The flavourings, additives and ages are what give us the many different varieties that we think of today. Mike has prepared 5 of these original 6 for me to try: white, green, yellow, oolong and black tea. We're starting with a more westernised method of tasting, weighing the leaves and brewing for exactly 5 minutes before having a sip of each to compare.
We can start off on the left side here, as you can probably see with this tea. Very much looks like something I've just picked up from the garden.
Yeah, very leafy.
Very leafy, very taken in. So tea is actually the leaves of a plant.
Yes.
The plant is called Camellia sinensis. With the white tea, what we'll do is we'll actually pick the top leaves of that plant, being what we call a budding leaf, or we call it the tips, as it being the tip of the plant. Your white tea will generally be picked from that first budding leaf and maybe the leaf underneath it. These would be what they consider a more tender and sweet part of the plant.
Okay.
If you want to grab yourself a spoon then, and what we're going to do, we're just going to grab a little bit of that tea and we're going to take it to our lips. Now I always think you purse your lips kind of like it's a straw and sort of breathe it up. Just be careful obviously not to go to the back of your throat. Okay. Get it into your mouth and give it a swirl. I'll go first for the embarrassment.
Didn't get all of it.
Didn't get all of it, yeah.
It's very nice, very sweet.
Very sweet, yeah. White tea is very well known for a good, clean sweetness, really. So green teas, there's one other part to the process. So from picking, they'll be withered and then they will be roasted. The roasting will actually kill any enzymes inside the leaf. So effectively what you consider with a green tea is you're tasting the plant as you would if you were just to pick the leaf and put it in your mouth. You start to notice a much more plant taste in there, whereas in the white teas we had that nice sweetness that was quite evident on there, very kind of honey sweetness in there. A little bit more floral kind of flavours coming through.
Have you noticed a difference in popularity versus tea to coffee at the moment?
We're still very much in a sort of coffee kind of world, to be honest. We went through what was kind of called the third wave of coffee, which introduced specialty coffees. I don't think tea's had that moment in the spotlight yet, and I'll be very interested to see if that comes along. Oolong teas was when they sort of brought in a particular process, and the process was to kind of bruise the leaves. So you'll see these different styles of oolongs, some quite green and some quite brown, where they've oxidised and gone through that process. Here once again we're getting quite floral elements on this one, and with it being quite a unoxidised one. We've not quite gotten into where the body's taking part now. Very nice and floral.
Very smooth.
Very smooth.
Very nice, yeah.
Yep. There is a very drying, that's that kind of bitterness starting to come through, or that astringency that's starting to come through. And this is where the milk comes in nicely. That milk would just level down that astringency.
I can appreciate that it is a black tea and it's nice, but I do think I prefer that one.
Okay. You're on your way to being a fully fledged tea taster there, aren't you? This one's had time to be able to ferment, which creates flavour over time.
It, to me, is lighter.
Not quite as intense as our black tea. Fresh peaty kind of element to it. I think it's absolutely fantastic.
Now you've tasted them again, which one is your favourite?
I always go back to that white tea.
Yeah,
I always
that was
think
really
that's
nice.
so surprising.
I think, surprisingly, it's this one for me, the Assam.
Now we've tasted each of the teas in our Western method, Mike's going to show me a traditional Chinese way, using his own Gaiwan pot. This method centres around a social exchange, seeing two people sit down and chat as the tea is brewed repeatedly.
So we're warming everything up, and then we're going to introduce our tea, and then we're going to introduce the water in. What I can do is I can pour to the side of the Gaiwan and introduce that water less aggressively into that tea.
Right.
The lid would go on, and I would immediately just allow myself a little gap in the lid there, and that's going to allow me just to remove the water. So we're going to go straight away with the water into the Justice cup.
So that's how you strain it as well.
But we wouldn't drink this first one, and we'd use that just to season those cups.
After several rounds of tasting, either the tea master or the customer will decide that they've had enough. Let's hope Mike doesn't get fed up of me.
Whilst you're still tasting your tea, we might be doing that second brew then as well.
Very sweet in flavour.
It is very well known for its sweetness actually. We've got a nice darkness, much more richness starting to come through there, so I know that I'm getting good flavour in the tea. And you'll see maybe a little bit more of a development in the flavours there. A little bit less sweetness in this one, a little bit more body to it as we're drinking.
Definitely.
I did actually buy myself a little Gaiwan to have at home.
Amazing.
And I found that with one of these specialty teas that I've had at home, actually I'm now brewing it in the Gaiwan and much further enjoying it than I ever have done before.
Oh, that's perfect. And I can tell that obviously you've really loved learning about tea and the kind of the process of brewing that. Do you think there's a new way of tea maybe on the horizon?
We're already being introduced to sort of specialty teas at the moment. It's just as fascinating as coffee. And I think having that sort of information as well and start going through that kind of a realm would be fantastic to see.
What a fascinating insight into a drink that plays such a huge part in the lives of the British people.
Whether you associate it with visiting your gran, being on a building site, or relaxing in front of the telly in the evening, everyone has a relationship with it. And I, for one, will be thinking a little more about it floating over on a clipper from China and rolling around in a Gaiwan next time I take a sip. Now, who's got the kettle on?